Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to somewhere we've never been. Well, almost. It is still in Russia, but our scene is in the south, near the Georgia border, in the Caucasus Mountains. A relatively undeveloped province by the name of Kabardino-Balkaria has rolling topography between steep rocky peaks, which are pastoral and picturesque. The modern descendants of the ancient people known as the Zykia have lived among these mountains since the 6th century BC. Common trees of this area include forests of pine, birch, and oak, which give way to alder, hazel, and rhododendron at higher elevations. Common animals here include the endangered western Caucasian tur, which is a wild sheep with broad, impressive horns. There are many small predators here like weasels, foxes, and jackals. It looks like heaven on earth to a man who loves the mountains and wilderness, except one significant detail: there are lots of brown bears here. In the northern part of the province, fall had brought severe flooding. This corrupted or washed away important food resources bears needed to fatten up for winter, putting them in a dire situation, and consequently the people of the area as well. Hungry bears were reported across the province, pushing into municipal boundaries and forcing strained interactions with people, their livestock, and communities. On November 1st, 2013, 80-year-old shepherd Yusuf Alkagirov was performing his farm chores the same way innumerable prior generations did before him, by walking the hillside and tending his sheep while they browsed the grasses and bushes of the meadows. The day in question was relatively normal prior to Yusuf's sheep scattering into a field below him. Sheep are not the brightest of animals, and when one goes a certain direction, it's common that the others will follow them, so it didn't seem too far out of ordinary for Yusuf. This time, though, he could see that the sheep were not just following each other. They were fleeing, something which scared them. Yusuf is remarkably spry and energetic for an 80-year-old man. He's lived in these mountains in the same village with his wife and family for his entire life. His family have cultivated many plants on his farm, and the effort yielded dividends for them in the form of food and work. As Yusuf shuffled through a big raspberry patch to head off his wayward sheep, he saw his sheep below him. He barked his familiar commands to them, and they began to turn around and head back to their pasture. Yusuf slowly walked along with his sheep, but had a strange feeling he was being watched. He was familiar with his environment and knew when something strange was in the air. He glanced around the raspberry patch and saw a gigantic brown bear crouched in a stalking position, clearly watching the shepherd approach it. He knew he couldn't run, as it might trigger the bear to chase him and kill him. Yusuf stared for seconds, which passed like hours, waiting for the bear to give away its motives. Perhaps if he froze and didn't react to the bear's watchful gaze, it would move on and leave him and his sheep alone. The bear and the man sized each other up for a few seconds before the bear clearly made up its mind. Yusuf watched helplessly as the bear's hind feet set in the soil and its front paws lifted in a long bound as it initiated its charge toward him. There were tens of sheep just below the man, but the bear's eyes were focused exclusively on Yusuf. His terror mounted as he watched the bear's paws reach out to bring it closer with each stride, its head floating statically as the rest of its body churned with each powerful bound. The ground between him and the bear had sparse cover and a slight slope toward Yusuf. He knew the bear would be on him before he could turn around, so he braced himself to fight for his life. As the bear closed in on Yusuf, he quickly removed his jacket in an attempt to use it as a matador's capote. The bear was a mere few feet from Yusuf, with its massive jaws held wide open, waiting for any part of the man to clamp onto, when he wrapped his jacket around its head. Yusuf immediately began punching the bear in the face. He landed several strikes before the bear freed itself from his jacket. Now enraged, the bear spun toward him and drove its teeth deep into the tissues of his forearm. Yusuf could feel his arm bones cracking under the immense pressure and wrenching action of the bear's bite. He reached his free hand over and grabbed the bear's lower jaw. He twisted and pried the bear's jaws from his forearm, then quickly plunged his newly freed hand into his pocket. Yusuf carried a pocket knife everywhere he went as a tool. It was a small weapon, but better than nothing. He quickly flicked the blade of the knife open with his freed arm, while still holding onto the bear's lower jaw with the other. As Yusuf guided the blade toward the bear's head, it quickly swiped its massive paw across his hand holding the knife, knocking it from his grasp. Now face to face, the bear wrapped its massive arms around Yusuf and picked him up in a bear hug a few feet off the ground. Bears do this to make sure to hold the object of their aggression close for a deadly bite. Yusuf was a quick thinker. He realized the bear's head was now very close to his, and his arms were tangled up in the bear's grasp, so he used the only weapon he had at his disposal, his head. Yusuf pulled his head back a few inches and drove his forehead into the massive brown bear's nose as hard as he could. The bear was so surprised and apparently hurt by this blow that it immediately dropped him to the ground. The bear was now facing away from Yusuf at this point, and he was not done fighting it. He had one target within his reach and began kicking the bear. He kicked the bear in the crotch several times as the bear turned and spun, trying to get an angle on this human attacking him. Yusuf and the bear wrestled back and forth, with the man finding a way to prevent a fatal bite or swat several times. But that wouldn't last for too much longer. The bear again wrapped Yusuf up in a bear hug and lifted him a few feet off the ground. In the action and confusion of the fight, the bear used its arms to toss Yusuf off a 25-foot-high cliff. Yusuf landed on the rocky ground at the bottom of the cliff and was knocked unconscious by the impact. The bear had apparently had enough of Yusuf and meandered off, leaving the injured and unconscious man to his fate at the bottom of the cliff. For 7 hours, Yusuf lay unconscious, sprawled on the ground. He regained his consciousness and slowly recovered his balance. As he glanced around, and his bearings came back to his mind, he began to wander in the direction of his home. As he stumbled and staggered his way toward his home, a group of villagers who had been sent out to find him approached. His wife had become worried after he missed dinner, and asked them to go find him. Yusuf had suffered 4 broken ribs from the 2 bear hugs and the wrestling match. His left arm had a large bite wound and several smaller bite wounds and bruises. His wife was so happy that he lived, she went to work in the kitchen while he recovered for a few days in the hospital. She cooked him not 1, but 3 of his favorite pies. Yusuf consumed all 3 pies in one sitting as a gluttonous celebration of life and his victory in hand-to-paw combat over the enormous brown bear. Yusuf stated that he got off easy, that if he had chickened out, the bear would have killed him. When asked about his bear fighting techniques, Yusuf said that it was a defensive technique his father had taught him. He was shown that a bear's nose is very sensitive, and if you hit them hard enough there, they might back down from attacking you. The villagers decided the bear was only playing with Yusuf and chose not to pursue and kill it. Wow, I can only hope that I'm as tough and as lively as Yusuf when I'm 80 years old. After reviewing the reported facts around this case, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think the bear was planning on killing and eating Yusuf, or was it just curious like the villagers thought? If it was hungry, why didn't the bear pursue the sheep? Do you think Yusuf actually hurt or injured the bear during the fight? I'm not sure what Yusuf's wife put in those pies, but they must be delicious for him to go through so much to get one. Your thoughts are important, so please post them in the comments section below and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a new place, sort of. We've been to Russia many times, but this time we are not going to the Far East, but to Central Asia and a part of Russia just north of Mongolia. The Ergaki Park is billed as the Yosemite Park of Russia and features some amazing scenery and very remote access to nature. It stretches for 343,000 hectares, which roughly translates into just below 850,000 acres. It lies in the South Krasnoyarsk Krai, Russia, if you want to know the governmental district. If you enjoy being alone in the woods, it is the kind of place you can definitely do that, but you may not be as alone as you like. Ergaki Park is mostly below 4,000 feet in elevation, but certain peaks nearby stand at just under 7,000 feet high. As you can see by the map, the area is almost completely uninterrupted by roads, as the mountains and dense forests stretch for hundreds of miles in every direction. Isolated stands of Siberian pine and larch, spruce and birch trees provide a disorganized backdrop for the sedges, grasses, and willows. Moose, red deer, wild boar, and roe deer forage along the hills and stunning peaks like this one. If you look closely at it, it resembles a giant tooth, like the canine of a brown bear. On July 27, 2021, Yevgeny Starkov and a few of his friends were visiting the park for a camping adventure.
They had their backpacks loaded up with tents, sleeping bags, food, and clothing. It isn't clear why, but no one in the camping party had a firearm of any kind, nor did any of them bring along bear spray. Only an hour prior, they had just arrived at their campsite and had begun to set up their tents and relax. Most of the campers had taken off their shoes and were relaxing around the fire. They were talking about the day's adventure and the rigors of the park. They'd seen many sights and covered a lot of ground. The clean, crisp air was refreshing, even after such a laborious and strenuous day. As the campers relaxed, a noise drew their attention. The vegetation was sparse in places where they were, and any animals near them would be easily visible. As they looked down the trail, they could see a huge dark shape slowly approaching them. It looked as if it was following their scent, and clearly knew they were there. As it got closer, they could see it was a giant brown bear. Now this area has an abundance of wildlife, as we've previously listed. Along with the animals it would normally eat, any brown bear would also have fish and the broad assortment of berries, roots, and bugs to forage on. I could find no source indicating a shortage of any of these food sources in their habitat this year, and it is assumed that there wasn't one. The campers immediately began yelling in a vain attempt to drive the bear off, but it continued to lumber closer to them. It stared at them and didn't show any fear of the noise or the fact that they were people. They could see the bear was drooling as it looked them over while slowly creeping toward them. The campers decided that the bear may be interested in the contents of their backpacks, so they began to scramble up a steep rock face just uphill from where they pitched their camp. The bear was only a few yards behind them and was following them up the cliff. It was clearly not interested in the food they had brought, or maybe it was interested in some other food. As the campers climbed and scrambled, Yevgeny began to lag behind. He was 42. Maybe it was the stress of the incident, exhaustion from the day's hiking, or his fitness. But either way, he lagged behind the group. He got so far behind the group that the bear began to focus on him. It followed closely behind the man, only a few yards from him, as it drooled and stared at him. Yevgeny became so terrified that he started to panic when he realized the bear was intent on killing him. From their perch on the cliff above their friend, the campers watched as the bear tackled Yevgeny and ferociously attacked him. They watched as the bear bit and clawed the screaming man. The bear would bite and shake its head violently time and time again until Yevgeny stopped moving. The attack lasted only a few minutes, but the worst was yet to come. The campers were helpless to stop the attack or come to their friend's aid. They watched for several minutes as the bear bit chunks of their friend's body off and swallowed them right before their eyes. They were barefoot and had nothing but the shirts on their backs. All of their equipment was down the cliff and on the other side of the bear. As soon as it had killed Yevgeny and eaten a small portion of his body, the bear cast its gaze and drooling mouth toward the campers still hiding on the cliff. It began to amble toward the cliff again, as if it was considering climbing after another human victim. They decided they couldn't wait for the bear to come pick them off one by one. The body of their friend would only hold its attention for so long, and they knew they had to take this time to escape. They climbed their way further up the cliff and crested the top together. They knew the bear was downhill, so they continued uphill, deciding on a circuitous route that would bring them back to the trail they came in on. They navigated the cold, stony ground without their shoes, coats, or protective equipment. For 7 hours they walked aimlessly, hoping to find someone to bring help for Yevgeny, or at least help them recover their friend's body. After trekking across many a mile of rugged terrain, they reported their friend's brown bear attack to park authorities. They immediately closed the park and announced the incident to the public. They had to make sure no other park visitors were killed by this bear, as it clearly had a human menu in mind. Hunters from the Ministry of Ecology, as well as Urgaki Park Administration, set out to locate the bear. They found the bear was feeding on Yevgeny and dispatched it with a single shot from a high-powered rifle. An investigation into the bear attack and subsequent death of Yevgeny Starkov was initiated. The authorities wanted to know why this bear began stalking people and why there had been such a sharp uptick in bear attacks in and around the park recently. Speculation began to swirl among inquiring minds. Many postulated that the longer winters recently experienced in the area had limited brown bear access to food resources. Recent winters had been colder, and the snow stayed much longer than in previous years, possibly contributing to a lack of food for them. In this particular brown bear attack, there were no reports of cubs anywhere near the bear, so it likely was not protecting any. Of course, it may have been a sow bear who was barren due to malnourishment, but there was no necropsy report that stated that. The campers hadn't surprised the bear, as it had clearly walked right toward them and into their camp. They hadn't ran in panic, stimulating the predatory instincts of the bear. The campers didn't indicate that they had seen any bear sign in the area. No bear scat or tracks. Yevgeny's fatal bear attack had all the hallmarks of a strictly predatory attack, and it was as simple as that. This was not the only bear attack reported in the year 2021, unfortunately, in the park. A young man was killed by a predatory brown bear a short time prior to Yevgeny, but that will be discussed in our next episode. Russia has approximately 120,000 of the 200,000 brown bears in the world. In Russia, from 1932 to 2017, at least 338 cases of people being injured or attacked by brown bears occurred. Note that does not include polar bears or Asiatic black bears. That comes out to almost 4 deaths or injuries to people each year in Russia by brown bears. That sounds like a lot of people, but given the area of the nation and it holding the highest number of brown bears in the world, it is actually quite low. The Russian government has done an excellent job of maintaining their wild places and letting the wildlife there thrive until they affect the human life there. After reviewing the facts surrounding this case, I have a few questions for you. Do you think the bear was initially drawn to the scent of the food the campers were carrying, or was it simply hunting the people? Why do you think the bear was drooling? Would it have killed more of the campers if they hadn't fled? Would bear spray or a firearm have changed the outcome of this attack? I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us back to the Russian Far East, to a district known as Pozharsky District. The town of Luchagorsk is remote and surrounded by wilderness. The terrain is remote and rugged mountains that extend for hundreds of miles to the east of nearly uninterrupted wilderness. Forests of birch, juniper, maple, and yew trees stand above a lower canopy of Japanese alder, Chosinia willow, and various subspecies of wild grape, kiwi, and berry bushes. Common animals in the area include wild boar, musk deer, roe deer, sika deer, and a unique and endangered critter called the long-tailed goral. The predators of this area are a murderer's row of powerful and dangerous animals and include wolves, the Amur leopard, the Ussuri brown bear, the Amur tiger, Ussuri black bear, and the Eurasian lynx, just to name a few. Each bear species in this location have plenty to feed on, between seasonal salmon runs, an abundance of wild berries, and plentiful game animals. Bears also eat pine nuts, wild walnuts, and acorns, which provide a late summer fat source in their diet. Around the town of Luchagorsk, there's been an uptick in temperature recorded over the last few decades, which affects berry and salmon seasons. If temperatures are too high, then berries shorten their season, and the fruit rots more quickly than in colder seasons. The salmon are affected by warmer water temperatures in the streams and rivers, which can cause them to avoid spawning altogether in warmer years. When several of these factors coincide, bears in the area begin to look for human populations to make up the difference in their diets. On the morning of August 20th of 2015, Nikolai decided to take his cat out for a walk. He was an elderly pensioner who lived in a large apartment complex in the town of only 21,000 residents. He sat down near one of his neighbors on a wooden bench along a man-made lake designed to hold wastewater from a local thermal plant. Along the edge of the lake grow a dense layer of reeds that nearly completely hide the lake from view. As Nikolai sat on the bench, an Asiatic black bear emerged from them, then bounded toward town. As Nikolai and his neighbor stood for a better view of the bear, it stopped and peered back in their direction. The presence of the humans apparently made the bear uneasy, and it turned around and headed back toward the shelter and privacy of the reeds. Suddenly, area dogs began to bark intensely. Nikolai turned around to see another Asiatic black bear trotting down the sidewalk along the other edge of his apartment complex. Wondering how the bear got so far away so fast, it wasn't long before he realized that this bear was a second bear. That is when Nikolai and his neighbor decided to head back into the safety of their apartment complex. As the other two men entered the complex, Viktor Dubitsky was exiting through another door to take his dog for a walk. As soon as he left the building, he was overwhelmed with the sensation of something being amiss. As he turned around, he was met by the larger Asiatic black bear already flying through the air toward him. Dubitsky was quickly taken down by the bear, and it wasted no time in swatting him across his throat with its claws. Dubitsky raised his arm to his face to ward off the bear attack as it clamped its jaws onto his forearm. A boisterous crowd soon began yelling at the bear and trying to drive it off as it attacked Dubitsky. The bear then drove its claws into the tissues on the inside of his thigh. A searing pain shot through his body, causing him to lose consciousness immediately. With Dubitsky now unconscious on the ground, a taxicab pulled up and the driver laid on the horn. Hearing this loud intrusion into its meal, the bear turned tail and bolted from the scene. The bystanders and witnesses to the attack rushed to Dubitsky's side and began assessing his wounds. An amazing scene of caring and support unfolded as the occupants of the apartment building began dropping bandages, first aid kits, and rubbing alcohol from their balconies. An ambulance was summoned and arrived around the same time as the local game officer. As first responders began to treat Dubitsky's injuries, Anatoly Tarasenko began to assess what led to the bear attack. As a game and resource officer, his main job is to head off illegal lumber and animal poaching. The lumber poachers of the area illegally harvested valuable wood such as Mongolian oak and Manchurian linden, as well as various animals to supplement their income, and this practice has led to broad clear cuts on the mountains around the town. As if this was not a demanding enough workload, he also responded to the presence of wild animals in town. The spry and strong-built 60-year-old immediately ordered a police blockade near the apartment building and requested the help of his 28-year-old assistant, Yaroslav Shishkin. The two men arranged to have hounds brought in to search for the bear in the reeds and drive them from town. Just as they had established their plan to canvass the reeds, Anatoly's cell phone rang, and another report of an incident split his attention. Anatoly listened as the details of the report were relayed to him. A few blocks away and across town, a man had stepped into some bushes to answer nature's call. As he emptied his bladder, an enormous brown bear approached him and swatted at him. He managed to flee before the bear could get a hold of him, and lost sight of the bear as he did so. Reports began to trickle in that lifeguards at the beach on the lake had seen a bear swimming across while a cub rode on its back. Anatoly connected the dots and figured that Dubitsky had run into the sow after she emerged from the lake. He determined that the sow and cub must have been separated due to the bustle and noise of the town they entered confusing them, and knew this scenario was very dangerous to the townsfolk and the bears. He immediately put in a request to shoot the bear on sight to head off another attack on a human. After the shoot-on-sight command was approved on August 21st, Luchagorsk lit up with reports of bears entering the town. There were reports of bear sightings around the coal mine near town and the power plant, as well as near summer homes and private apiaries used to produce honey. Bears were reported raiding dumpsters and gardens near dwellings, and the reports only increased over the next several days. Each day that followed added another 10 bears who were encroaching on the town and its residents. Just outside of town, long lines of bears began forming as they followed each other toward whatever offerings the town might bring them. It was as if they had all honed in on the people of the town and now were planning on finding what they needed in an area they had previously avoided. The residents of Nikolai's apartment building would sit on their balconies and watch as bear after bear swam across the lake and wearily pulled themselves ashore. Residents began to report the bears appearing in their basements, and even walking down sidewalks in the middle of town. By the end of the month, the town was overrun with bears. Anatoly and the other game officers were at a loss trying to figure out how best to handle the situation. Nikolai Agapov served as a district inspector for the nearby Land of the Leopard National Park. Given there are no bear experts in Primorsky Krai, he gathered information regarding bear behavior from local hunters and game officers. They told him that bears would routinely raid honeymead stores of locals and behaved like drunks, wrecking everything they could reach and generally making a mess. Other reports indicated more endearing traits, like a sow bear returning to the skin of one of her deceased cubs as it decayed, as if mourning her lost baby. Agapov and Anatoly quickly discovered that every natural food source for the bear had catastrophically failed in 2015. Bear populations had significantly increased in prior years, due to an abundance of food causing a collapse of their food sources. This forced a mass migration of black and brown bears that for some reason focused its route toward Luchagorsk. Bears are known to vividly remember where they locate food and even the scent of food during their travels. Now they were using this information to seek out food to prepare them for hibernation. They were underweight and in no condition to hibernate, which would cause a prolonged problem for the towns in the area, as bears who do not hibernate are extremely dangerous due to hunger. This situation left local authorities with 3 avenues of protecting the residents of the town. They could launch a hazing program designed to drive the bears away from town, or could provide another source of food outside the city boundaries to keep them from entering. The last solution they had at their disposal was to start killing the bears to bring their numbers back into a sustainable balance. They knew that once the bears decided that people were fair game, then attacks would increase and people would die. Anatoly put together a response team of 14 members to react to bear sightings. Each member was a local hunter, a game officer, or other men experienced with bears. They worked in shifts, answered calls from residents, and responded to diffuse situations. They blocked manholes and basement accesses across the city to keep bears from hiding there and circulated information pamphlets to residents on what to do when they ran into a bear. Gone, at least for now, were the days when parents would allow their children to walk to school by themselves. They accompanied their kids everywhere they went as much as possible. Police cars blared their sirens while driving around town to drive the bears out, and fire trucks sprayed down the reeds around the lake to limit cover for the bears. On August 26th at around 9 p.m., one of the response team's members, named Alexander Zhdanov, was relaxing after a day's work of driving the coal delivery train at the mine. He is an avid hunter and snowboarder and had just finished dinner. He was checking in on his social media account when his phone rang with a report of a bear incident demanding his attention. Apparently, 2 bears had been spotted in town and an officer responded to the location. He had wounded one of the bears with his service pistol, and the bears had fled afterward. This meant there was a wounded and desperate bear prowling the streets of his town. He grabbed his Saiga hunting rifle and headed toward the location as quickly as he could. Zhdanov jumped into the police van, and the group began to scan the shadows of the evening looking for the bears. Suddenly, a group of people ran from the old park area, screaming in terror. The shadowy outline of an enormous bear burst onto the sidewalk, and Zhdanov immediately bailed from the van and pursued the bear on foot. As he walked, the headlamps of the police car were used to light up the night. Zhdanov yelled bear warnings as he walked through the streets in an attempt to alert anyone still outside. The injured bear limped and moaned its way through the neighborhood with Zhdanov and the police in close pursuit. It fled into a playground area between residential homes and out of view of the pursuing response team. As Zhdanov worried about the possibility of hitting a resident with any shot he may need to take, he walked right up to the crouched bear. Zhdanov quickly shouldered his rifle and fired twice, knocking the bear backward. The bear moaned in pain as it was now paralyzed. It raked its claws on the sidewalk, trying to retreat from the confusion and violence the city presented it. Residents poured from the doors of houses, and drivers lit up the bear as it lay on the sidewalk, moaning and whining. 10 minutes later, the bear succumbed to its injuries, and it died, having not injured nor harmed any of the residents. Still searching for insight into the bear invasion, the carcass of the bear was taken, and a necropsy was performed. The bear was found to be a 4-year-old sow and undersized for its age. This was likely due to diminished food for this year, which was one of its pivotal years for development. It had cubs because they could see it was lactating, but her cubs had not been located. This bear fit the description and size of the bear that had attacked Dubitsky. Anatoly surmised this was the sow bear who was searching for her cub, and that she had never found it. A few days later, a drowned cub was discovered on the shore of the lake, and the mystery had seemingly been solved. By mid-September, the residents had decided the bears were not going to leave. This was a short-term boon for local taxi drivers, as few residents would walk the bear-infested streets at risk of their safety. Local teens began to dare each other to go bear spotting at night for thrills. The locals would drive their cars up and illuminate the dumpsters of the area to film the bears like it was a new form of entertainment. On the outskirts of town, armed beekeepers would patrol their apiaries toward off invasions for bears seeking the honey inside. They began by firing warning shots, but the bears were so accustomed to people that nothing would frighten them away. Eventually, the bears were simply shot and left where they fell. Zhdanov approximated that 100 bears were killed in this manner without notifying any authorities. That fall in Primorsky Krai, there were 60 documented incidents of bears entering villages, with 18 bear conflicts reported. There were a handful of human deaths due to bear attacks, and numerous other hunters, children, and elderly people were injured by the bears. Anatoly was torn between the dilemma of residents following the hunters and taking pictures while they chased away or killed interloping bears, and filled with joy by seeing the Asiatic black bears in such numbers. The species was recovering, and their presence was proof. Nearby the large city of Khabarovsk, with its population of 550,000 people, a pregnant woman was attacked by a bear as the problem spread from Luchagorsk to other areas. Reports indicated that the pregnant woman saved her own life by biting the bear back, forcing its retreat. 4 bears had been shot in her small village, while 3 others were hit by cars. Bears in the area had become so hungry that they were seen digging up graves in the cemetery to feed on the corpses of the dead. The invasion of the starving bears had begun to sway public opinion among the residents of villages in the area. One Sunday, 54-year-old Yuri Kolpak was called to respond to a report of a bear in an apartment building basement. Yuri was charged with wildlife protection for the entire region and had shown up in response to the report when about 200 residents began to gather. They asked him if there was any way the bear could simply be tranquilized and removed from the basement to be released elsewhere. When he responded that there was no way this could happen because they couldn't tell how much sedative to put in the dart for an animal of unknown size, and the bear could do a lot of damage to anyone around, in the 10 minutes it took for the drug to take effect, the residents began calling him a murderer from their elevated balconies. Yuri was apparently comedic in his address to the crowd as he asked for volunteers to go with him and sing the bear lullabies. Yuri finally mustered the bravery to enter the basement alone, with the bear. The bear chuffed and tried to run Yuri off, but in the flicker of his flashlight, Yuri fired and ended the bear's life. The residents were angry at him but didn't appreciate the danger the presence of the bear presented to them and their loved ones. Yuri posted warnings on how to avoid the necessity of another bear being shot. He instructed the residents to remove their vegetables from their gardens and gather all the fruit that had fallen on the ground to avoid attracting another bear to their apartment building. He educated the residents that bears who find fruit rotting on the ground will wander long distances to return to the location after being darted and removed to the taiga. Yuri was quick to flash photos of a bear that had killed a fisherman earlier in the year. The bear had decapitated the fisherman as well as dismembered him. This did little to dissuade the residents' sentiments of tolerance toward the bears. The bear response team found themselves facing outrage and public backlash from the necessity of shooting bears right in front of people. The residents began to second-guess the policy of shooting the bears and wondered if the bear killings weren't just part of some overprotective bloodlust from the bear response teams. Conspiracy theories and alternative narratives began to fill the minds of the residents of the area, fed by people who didn't want any of the bears killed. The members of the bear response team quickly arrived at the source of the dilemma. Many of the bears invading the town were rare Asiatic black bears and were very cute and more diminutive than the obviously dangerous giant brown bears so common in the area. They began to be filled with regret at having to do their jobs of protecting people who frequently didn't understand the danger the bears brought with each appearance. The locals began to be split in opinion on how to handle the bear crisis. With so many adult bears being shot, orphaned cubs were now roaming the streets as well. They were undoubtedly being familiarized with humans, and that would not bode well for their independent lives as adults. Many of the orphaned cubs were delivered to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in the neighboring town of Utyos. The center was founded by a man named Vladimir Kruglov, who had hogtied some 40 captured tigers by hand himself. The center eventually reared and released 300 orphaned cubs in preceding years. By October, a lone cub was located on the edge of Luchagorsk. It was seemingly orphaned and scared. A local media member began leaving it food as the response team waited 3 weeks for the needed paperwork to permit its capture. A few of the local school children were invited to film the capture of the cub by the media member and raced ahead to the tree the cub was hiding in. Members of the response team eventually caught the Asiatic black bear cub and brought her safely to a holding pen for transport soon thereafter. Unbeknownst to the men, someone had shot and wounded the cub with a rubber bullet, trying to haze it away from the area. She passed away that evening. Immediately after the death of the cub, the bears around Luchagorsk disappeared. They were no longer in the reeds or raiding dumpsters in town. They had simply vanished, even quicker than they had appeared. Experts stated that the bears had made their way back up to the wilderness to hibernate, but that many of them would not make it through the winter in the condition they were in. This would bring the elevated populations down and back into balance, as tragic and harsh as the facts were. Asiatic black bear populations are rebounding and the species numbers are stabilizing at healthy thresholds. The brown bears of the area are just as abundant as ever as things have returned to normal in the town of Luchagorsk, with the bears living in the forest and the humans safely in their towns. After reviewing the sad and tragic details of this incident, I am left with a few questions for you. Do you think that preservation efforts had created a spike in bear populations that the local habitat could not sustain? Do you think the orphaned cubs will be able to be rehabilitated? What do you think could have been done better to have the bears away from Luchagorsk? Why do you think the public sentiment turned against the bear response teams? I will enjoy reading and replying to your thoughts, so post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.